All right, welcome to the podcast. This is episode 6. I'm throwing myself off because I have it titled episode 5, but that is wrong. This is episode 6 about the escape after the riot, the flight to the north.
The riot where they beat all the slave catchers with their guns.
Yes. Yeah, so that happened. The riot happened. I mean, honestly, it would be very strange if you were listening to this and hadn't listened to the previous episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, that happened. The riot happened. Ed Gorsuch is dead. His son Dickinson got shot a whole bunch. His nephew,
other Gorsuch got clobbered up.
Yeah, his nephew Pierce, Dr. Pierce, got his head stomped on a whole bunch. And now it's time for the rioters to take to the hills to flee, because a lot of people are going to be coming after them. So sources for this episode, as always, the book Bloody Dawn by Thomas P. Slaughter. Again, A Freeman's Tale by William Parker, which was published in 1866. LincolnConspirators.com, Freedom's Battle of Christiana. Syracuse.com, How the 1851 Jerry Rescue in Syracuse sent an earthquake voice through the land. This all happened in 1851. And that year, I think as we mentioned in the previous episode, it was a particularly dry summer. And so that kind of sets the stage a little bit. They're fleeing. This is September. They're fleeing to the north. They have kind of less cover than you would expect. Trees lost their leaves early. Everything's just kind of dry and dead.
Yeah, everything gets a little denuded.
Yeah, so they're fleeing through a gray, tan brown landscape. As I mentioned last time, only 2 of the rioters required medical attention. One of them had a ball in his wrist he had to push out, and the other one had a ball in his leg that had to be surgically removed, but they were pretty much okay. They were treated by a guy, Dr. Augustus Kane, who was a local doctor and sympathizer with the abolitionist cause. Neither of those guys was permanently crippled, but they would be among the people who were arrested. Everybody else had to flee.
So, super hard to find a doctor that would be cool, or
I don't
are there
think so.
Enough sympathetic doctors?
Well, I don't think they had a hard time finding a sympathetic doctor in that particular region of Pennsylvania at that time. Remember when I think it was Dickinson, Gorsuch, and Marshall Klein were looking for help. They couldn't find a doctor.
They had a hard time. Yeah,
they couldn't find a doctor that would help them.
Right.
So I think most of the doctors in the area were pretty sympathetic to the abolitionists.
Too many Quakers and such floating around.
Yeah, exactly. So Parker's group split into smaller groups and fled in different directions. Parker himself left his wife Eliza behind with the kids as they fled north. He wrote in A Freeman's Tale, "My wife was obliged to secret herself, leaving the children in care of her mother and to the charities of our neighbors. I was questioned by my friends as what I should do, as they were looking for officers to arrest me. I determined not to be taken alive and told them so. But thinking advice as to our future course necessary, I went to see some old friends and consoled about it. Their advice was for us to leave, as were we captured and imprisoned. They could not foresee the result. Acting upon this hint, we set out for home. When we met some female friends, they told us that 40 or 50 armed men were at my house." So
that's a lot of men.
Yeah, the immediate response from the white community was pretty over the top.
Okay, so it's there's enough support for the abolitionist cause in the general area that they have places they can get cover, they have places they can get aid, but it's not like they're cool and there's enough people in the immediate area that are going to come after them that there is urgency. They need to get the hell away.
So Christiana is southeastern Lancaster County. That seemed to be a little bit of a hotbed of abolitionist, sentiment. Mm-hmm. And that was more of a Quaker area, so there would be more Quakers in there. As you get further west into Lancaster County, you get into the more southern sympathizing community. So a lot of these guys who came out to search for William Parker and the other rioters were coming out of Lancaster City.
Bunch of Anabaptists and Methodists.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So they weren't as big in the abolition. So yeah, this was they got all excited in Lancaster City, and a lot of men from the city of Lancaster rode out across the county to try to capture them. A $1,000 reward was offered for Parker. It was later increased to $2,000, dead or alive. So it was a pretty big reward for the time. And the night following the riot, as I mentioned, 40 or 50 guys assembled at Parker's house. They were assembled in Lancaster County and then later reinforced by men from Baltimore. Baltimore is not that far to the
Right.
south. So they headed north. An anti-slavery newspaper at the time wrote, "We saw the horde yesterday that in the name of the law where the other day poured into Lancaster County and witnessed the ferocity at which they pursued and indiscriminately seized colored men." So there's just a crazy rampaging group of angry white men in Lancaster County now. They were deputized by, I don't know, whatever forces decided that they could deputize them, and they were eager for revenge. One of them in this large group held up a pistol and vowed to shoot the first black thing he saw. Which is not awesome. So that large group of men set off to capture the fugitives. The federal government in Philadelphia sent 45 Marines and 40 Philadelphia police officers to help reinforce this group.
Okay.
And this whole big...
And are those federal officers, are those like from the slave marshals? So they send like Marines and slave marshals?
No. So I think they were just regular Philly police officers. They it was kind of like the 2 Philly cops that were originally paid to go help Gorsuch. And then,
but like this time the federal government was telling them to go.
Yeah, they were like the Federal Slave Commission was like, I guess maybe deputizing them and then giving them like a per diem or something to go help. So it was basically just mercenaries, just Philly cops who are doing it for some extra cash. So between the 45 Marines, the 40 Philly cops, the 50 guys from Lancaster, and like an unknown number of people from Baltimore, we're looking at like 200 people who descend on this relatively small area of Lancaster County to try to capture the rioters. They basically just attempted to arrest every black man in Lancaster County. That was their plan. They're like, we'll just arrest all of the black people.
Like God sort of.
We'll figure it out from there. And it was described as a reign of terror where they just harassed, fugitive and free black men and women, as well as just any like white sympathizers in the region. They're busting into people's houses, knocking shit over.
It was like Joe Arpaio style.
Yeah. So everybody in Lancaster County was suffering because of this group of angry white men. Warrants were issued for 5 white guys who were present at the riot: Castor Hanway, Elijah Lewis, Joseph Scarlett, some other, I don't know who the other 2 were, but
none of those guys got involved, right? They just refused to get involved on like Gorsuch's side.
Right. They refused to. Remember the Fugitive Slave Act says that they have to help capture black people, and they refused to help capture because they would have been killed.
Yeah.
And so,
but by law, they were like compelled to fight the overwhelming number of people that were.
And there's, it's possible we'll find out a little more about Kastner Hanway in the trial and things like that. And it's possible that he was an abolitionist and was sympathetic to the rioters. And Elijah Lewis did, seem like he went around spreading the word and gathering up people to go there. So they may have been abolitionists and may have been legitimately on the side of Parker and the rioters.
But they didn't kill anybody.
Do anything.
They didn't chop anybody or bludgeon anybody.
They just stood there on the periphery and refused to help capture anybody. But that's a crime. That's treason. Yeah. So 5 white guys were arrested and just dozens of black people or warrants were issued for their arrest. Joseph Scarlett, a local white farmer, was arrested, and the paper commented that they took him by the throat and pointed bayonets at him all around. So it was not a peaceful arrest.
No.
Lewis and Hanway, seeing what was going on, they rode into Lancaster and surrendered themselves to the police in Lancaster City, figuring that it was probably safer to turn themselves in directly to the police than let this like angry mob of people get a hold of them.
Yeah, I mean, very well, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
It depends a little bit on the police, but
yeah. So, most of this group of angry white people viewed Lewis and Hanway as leaders of the riot and expressed more anger at them than they did towards the fugitives. Like I don't know.
They were like, you knew better.
Yeah, you betrayed us.
Right. Race traitors.
Yes. So that pissed, they were like bigger enemies at the time. Klein confronted Lewis and Hanway in Lancaster when they turned themselves in. He was hanging out in the city, and he said, "You white-livered scoundrels, when I pleaded for my life like a dog and begged you not to let black people fire upon us, you turned around and told them to do so. That was a complete lie. That exchange never happened, and Klein was most likely hiding in the woods when the firing started.
I feel like it's hard for a lot of these people to wrap their heads around the idea that like there wasn't like a white leader.
Yeah.
Like they're like, oh, those white guys were there. They must have been the ones that were organizing. They were in charge of all the black people.
Yeah. Yeah, they couldn't. I mean, even in the North, like, what's that movie, Glory? Mm-hmm. You know, they talk about like the first black regiment in the Civil War. They still needed to have like a white guy in charge. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't matter if you were like an abolitionist or not. Like, for the most part, people in the 19th century just couldn't wrap their heads around black people being in charge of anything.
That's one of the things that's actually really like fascinating about John Brown.
Yeah,
is that like there were lots of abolitionists by the time of the Civil War, but like. There were very, very few white people that weren't also white supremacists.
Yeah.
But John Brown seemed like he genuinely believed in like racial equality.
Yeah.
But yeah, most people didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, John Brown, I guess, just kind of saw them all as like children of God.
Yeah.
He was super into God.
He was super into God, yeah.
But yeah, there's been worse ways that people have interpreted the Bible.
Yeah, so absolutely.
It's all right. So yeah, Klein confronted them, but he was lying because he hid in the woods. Testimonies of those captured by the posses were held over the weekend following the riot between Saturday and Monday, and the testimonies were wrapped up in Christiana, and then the case moved to Lancaster City, where the federal prosecutors started to prepare the treason case. Meanwhile, William Parker, Alexander Pinckney, and Abraham Johnson, remember Pinckney was his brother-in-law, and Abraham Johnson was another escaped slave that was living in his house that helped in the riot. They hid at a friend's house until 9 p.m. the night of the riot, and then from A Freeman's Tale, we set out for Canada. The great trial was now to leave my wife and family. Uncertain as the result of the journey, I felt I would rather die than be separated from them. It had to be done, however, and we went forth with heavy hearts, outcast for the sake of liberty. When we walked as far as Christiana, we saw a large crowd. Late as it was, to some of whom, at least, I must have been known. We heard distinctly, "Ain't that Parker?" "Yes," was answered. "That's Parker." Klein was called for, and he, with some 9 or 10, followed after. We stopped, and they stopped. One said to his comrades, "Go on, that's him." Another replied, "You go." So they contended for some time who should come to us. At last they went back. I was sorry to see them go, for I wanted to meet Klein at the end of the day's transactions. We went unmolested to Penningtonville, and in consequence of the excitement, thought it best to continue to Parksburg. Nothing worth mentioning occurred for a time. We proceeded to Downingtown. So just a fun little. These guys. That's the other thing. These guys are cowards. Yeah. Like, they see Parker like on the outskirts of their like big angry mob.
They're like, "That's him. Go get him." No, you go get him.
Yeah. And Parker just stood there. He's like, "Yeah, come on, let's do this." This is, we had quite the day. I would like to put an exclamation point on this. So they are on their way. I think it's at this point, Noah Burley, John and George Hammond, and Nelson Ford, the 4 men that escaped from Gorsuch in Baltimore. They escaped to Canada in a separate group. Like I said, like Parker's group kind of fractured and left separately.
And were they not after Parker's wife?
So she has a whole other little side quest.
Okay.
Which we'll get to in a minute. But they are after her. She just like, I don't know, she's a woman, and it's still that's the thing. Parker is still a man in the 19th century. So it's still her job to deal with their kids while he runs away. Like, as cool as Parker is, he's still a man in the 19th century.
Yeah. I don't know. I just, I feel like if I was trying to escape to Canada, I don't know. I'd want to take my wife and kid with me. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I'd want like to get them away. Like,
no. And it's probably Parker's greatest failing is that he's not awesome to his wife and kids.
Yeah.
And we'll see that at the end of it all, like the kind of coda to his story is the like kind of shittiest thing he does. But it's he basically was like, "All right, you take care of the kids. I'm going to Canada, and then come meet me after you figure out what you're going to do with the kids." Okay. It's women's work. Yeah. Women have to get the kids away from the slavers.
Okay.
So the four men, Noah Burley, John and George Hammond, Nelson Ford, at this point, they exit the historical record. We don't really know a whole hell of a lot about what happened to them after this. It's likely that George Hammond had escaped to Canada prior to the riot. The three that remained and participated in the riot, Nelson Ford and John Hammond, were the two that were living in Parker's house at the time. I think it was John Hammond was the one that was going by John Beard, and Nelson Ford was going as John Beard. John Hammond was going as Joshua Hammond.
Yeah, they did a good job throwing off pursuit, changing their names all the time, because I don't know who any of these people are. I keep forgetting
that's kind of one of the most frustrating things about this story is like the story centers around their escape. Like I don't like talking about Gorsuch so much and but the historical record on these guys is not that deep. There's not a lot written about them. And even when you do read about them, like people often are confused. They're not sure. Like,
I was going to say it's in part because they did a good job.
Yeah,
they were trying to stay under the radar. And they did.
Well, and they changed their names multiple times. And so to the best of our knowledge, George Hammond was already gone to Canada prior to the riot. Nelson Ford and John Hammond were in Parker's house. Noah Bewley was living down the lane. He was the one that kind of showed up with the rest of the rioters later. And then the three of them, they weren't part of the group that was captured and put on trial for treason or anything like that. So presumably they made it to Canada or somewhere else in the northern United States. And they just exit the historical record from here. So, hopefully they went on and had good lives. They seemed like they were never returned to slavery. So, hopefully it all worked out for them. Parker and his group, Parker, Pickney, and Johnson, they traveled 500 miles north to Rochester, New York by train and foot and horse-drawn coach, arriving 2 days later. As they traveled, Parker's group received advice and aid from sympathizers along the way. They were advised to avoid Philadelphia due to the excitement over the events. And Quakers in Norristown provided them with money and a vehicle. So they had, people were kind of giving them tips and helping them out. From A Freeman's Tale, talking about being in Norristown or ending up in Norristown. Parker wrote, "Our driver, being partly intoxicated, set us down at the wrong place, which we were obliged to stay out all night." So they had to spend the night in Norristown because their drunk driver dropped them off. Which, I don't know. You don't want to spend a night in Norristown now. You probably did. Further north, we took a stage. Being the first applicants for tickets, we secured inside seats, and from the number of us, we took up all the places inside. But another traveler coming, I tendered him mine and rode with the driver. The passenger thanked me, but the driver, a curl and most prejudiced person I ever came in contact with.
Oh, that's quite a bar.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah. That is just a crazy thing for this driver to be the most racist man.
That like a dude who has regular conflict with slave catchers.
Yeah, a guy who's made vocation seems to be fighting slavers. He's saying this carriage driver is the most racist man he ever met. He said, would never wait after a stop until I could get on, but would drive away, leaving me to swing, climb, or cling to the stage as best I could. So I was just a dick, I guess. Yeah. He says at Big Eddie. I don't know where Big Eddie is. Some landmark.
That's a place. That's not a dude.
No. I think it's a place.
Then we got a ride from Big Eddie. Big Eddie was all right.
No. At Big Eddie, we took the cars. Directly opposite me sat a gentleman who, upon learning that I was for Rochester, said he was going there too, and afterwards proved an agreeable traveling companion. A newsboy came in with papers, some of which the passengers bought. Upon opening them, they read of the fight in Christiana. "Oh, see here," said my neighbor. "Great excitement in Christiana. A statesman killed and his son and nephew badly wounded." After reading, the passengers began to exchange opinions on the case. Some said they would like to catch Parker and get the $1,000 reward offered by the state, but the man opposite me said, "Parker must be a powerful man." Pickney and Johnson became alarmed and wanted to leave the car at the next stopping place, but I told them that there was no danger. I then asked particularly about Christiana, where it was, on what railroad, and other questions, to all of which I received correct replies. One of the men became so much attached to me that when we would go off to an eating saloon, he would pay for both. So then he made a friend.
Nice.
Yeah, he tricked everybody into just by feigning ignorance of Christiana, and then made a friend who bought him dinner along the way.
All right.
So yeah, most racist man he ever met, and then a nice
buddy,
guy.
yeah.
And he made a buddy. News of the riot reached Rochester the same day as Parker and his group did. You know, that all travels the same way.
Yeah.
So, Rochester, New York, and upstate New York in general was kind of having a moment at this time in terms of abolition. You know, we've talked about Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and how, you know, Pennsylvania had the earliest abolition societies, the earliest, abolition laws, things like that. But in the early 1850s, upstate New York was having a moment. So this was like a good place for these guys to flee on their way to Canada.
Well, that was still like the tail end of what I forget which was that the third Great Awakening.
Yeah,
you know how they have those Great Awakenings.
Second,
And they had like the burned over district up there.
Yeah.
Like there were just like weird fundamentalist religious sects popping up all over the place in upstate New York, and I feel like a lot of them had abolitionist leanings.
Yeah, so. You know, upstate New York at this time, Frederick Douglass made his home in Syracuse or in Rochester, and published his abolitionist newspaper. You had these like abolition political parties were having their like national conventions there. I think we talked about in a previous episode the Fugitive Slave Convention that was held in upstate New York. Mm-hmm. Like this was kind of the place to be for abolition at the moment. And a kind of a good story to illustrate that is something called the Jerry Rescue. So that occurred right around the same time as all this, on October 1st, 1851. And it involved the public rescue of a fugitive slave who had been arrested in Syracuse, which happened to coincide with the Anti-Slavery Liberty Party's state convention, which was also taking place in Syracuse at the same time. So a year earlier, in October of 1850, hundreds of people had come to central New York and descended on Syracuse to attend a meeting called by this man Thomas G. White to discuss methods in which the citizens of Syracuse could resist the Fugitive Slave Act. You know, the personal liberty laws and things like that we've discussed. It was obviously very unpopular in a abolitionist hotbed. Mm-hmm. And as an interesting side note, that Compromise of 1850 was signed into law by President Millard Fillmore, who was a native of upstate New York. He was from Buffalo. So they were betrayed by their hometown guy. A man by the name of Reverend Jermaine W. Laugan, station master on the what would become the Underground Railroad. I don't think they called it that at the time, who had escaped his own enslavement in Tennessee in 1835 and was therefore a prime target for the new fugitive slave law, gave a speech at this convention. He began, "I am bound to Syracuse by pecuniary interest and social and family bonds. And do you think I could be taken away from you and my wife and children and be a slave in Tennessee? I tell you, the people of Syracuse and the whole North must meet this tyranny and crush it by force or be crushed by it." Laugan then brought the assembled crowd to their feet with a rousing call to action. "The time has come to change the tones of submission to tones of defiance. I say, if you stand with us in resistance to this measure, you will be saviors of your country. Your decision tonight in favor of the resistance will give vent to the spirit of liberty and shout of joy all over the North. Heaven knows that this will break out somewhere. May God grant that Syracuse be the honored spot, whence shall send an earthquake voice throughout the land." A year later, October 1st, 1851, Laugan's earthquake that he spoke of came to fruition in what would be called the Jerry Rescue. So that evening, October 1st, a large group of Syracusians,
Syracusites? I don't
know. Both black and white people freed a man by the name of William Henry, who went by Jerry, which is not a nickname for William, but from his jail cell in Clinton Square in Syracuse. Jerry was well known around the city. He had escaped his enslavement in Missouri and settled in Syracuse only about a year before his arrest. He worked as a cooper in Hanover Square and was working in the cooperage on the day of his arrest.
I've always kind of wanted to do that.
Yeah, it seems fun.
Seems like a cool job.
Yeah. So around noon, a federal marshal, he's the same kind of federal slave marshal as Henry Klein, this guy named Henry Allen, and a group of local police entered the cooperage and without warning threw Jerry to the ground and placed him in handcuffs. Coincidentally, Charles Wheaton, a member of the local vigilance committee, was at a nearby hardware store and saw what happened to Jerry. So he ran to the First Congregational Church on East Genesee Street, where the Liberty Party was holding their state convention. After Wheaton told them what was going on, the convention was immediately adjourned, and the crowd headed to Townsend Block, where the federal commissioner, Joseph Sabin, had his office. The news of Jerry's arrest spread throughout the rest of the town, and per a previously agreed upon signal, church bells were rang throughout the city to alert the citizens that one of their own had been taken.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. As the chamber and staircase filled with people, the proceedings against Jerry moved forward. Sabin postponed the proceedings for the evening. Spurred on by the crowd, Jerry made a break for the door, still bound with his hands and feet. He made it about a half mile to the side of the Erie Canal before he was apprehended, beaten, and returned to custody. That's a long distance to run with your hands and feet bound.
It is.
It sounds like he just made it to the side of the Erie Canal and was stopped.
Booked it.
Well, I mean, I feel like he maybe could have kept going if it wasn't for the canal there. He ran as far as he could in leg shackles and handcuffs, and then just couldn't cross the canal like that.
Yeah. So
Sabin resumed their proceedings around 5:30 p.m. that night, and called for a larger police force to surround the block. Federal Marshal Allen, the guy who had arrested Jerry, pleaded for the local militia to be called up, which word of that spread throughout the crowd, and that pissed him off even more, the idea that they were going to call up the militia. So according to an account by Laugan, which was published in 1859, the crowd of approximately 3,000 people gathered outside the police station, many carrying stones, clubs, and axes, some of which had been laid out in front of Wheaton's hardware store. So it's the owner.
He was just laying weapons out.
Yeah, he's like, here you go. Here's all the axes and sledgehammers from my store. Go to it.
That's cool.
So they went to the police station, started throwing stones through the windows. One narrowly missed Sabin's head, and he decided to adjourn until 8:30 a.m., hoping the crowd might disperse. The officials left, and Jerry was moved to a back room. Almost, right around the same time, a little bit after 8, several members of the vigilance committee returned to the scene and decided that it was time to liberate Jerry once and for all. So someone gave an order, and the crowd proceeded to smash the windows and remove bricks to gain entry from the building. They smashed down the walls.
Oh.
So they just went through the side of the building. And eventually 2 African-American men, Peter Hollenbach and William Gray, entered the room, took Jerry out, and carried him into the street. They cut off his shackles outside the Syracuse house and put him on a carriage. He was hidden for several days and then made his way to Kingston, Canada, where he lived as a free man for 2 years and then just died because it was the 19th century and people just died.
He just died of it being a long time ago.
Just died of it. Sure, he had a pretty rough life. From 1852 until the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, a celebration was held annually in the city of Syracuse, which was attended by leaders of the abolition and anti-slavery movements, including William Lloyd Garrison, Samuel May, Lucy Stone, Garrett Smith. Laugan would come back, and then Frederick Douglass would come over from Rochester and speak. So for detractors, including people within Syracuse who weren't on board with all this, they saw this as a violation of law and order, and they actually organized a law and order convention in the days that followed. It was their little stupid counter protest. Mm-hmm. And they viewed it as a direct assault on the rule of law and the Constitution and the Union, and said that those who were in support of the rescue, for those involved in or support of the rescue, it was a manifestation of what William Henry Seward called adherence to a higher law, and which dictated slavery's inherent immorality. So yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of, So upstate New York was a hotbed for this kind of material or for this kind of action.
It wasn't too much later. They had that big, it was Seneca Falls. They had the first big like women's suffrage meeting.
Yeah, that was, a lot of the women there were also abolitionists.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crossover between those two movements. Yeah, so upstate New York had a lot going on. And like I had mentioned, Frederick Douglass lived there in Rochester. And so, a couple days after the riot, William Parker and his guys arrived at Frederick Douglass's doorstep. Parker had known him from their days in slavery. They were held on plantations that were somewhat close to each other. I think they were acquaintances. So from A Freeman's Tale, he wrote, "On leaving the cars, we walked 2 or 3 squares. We overtook a colored man who conducted us to the house of a friend of mine. He welcomed me at once, and we were acquainted before." He does not use Douglass's name in 1866. He just refers to him
as a friend of mine.
As a friend, yep. So in 1866, this is still hot enough that he's not going to give away Douglass's identity.
Douglass was concealing fugitives.
Yep. So almost immediately, the fugitives started receiving admirers who wanted to hear details of the riot. They were exhausted, so Douglass kind of shooed the admirers away, and the 3 rested while Douglass went to work on a plan to get them to Canada. Douglass wrote, "The work of getting these men safely into Canada was a delicate one. They were not only fugitives from slavery, but charged with murder. The officers were in pursuit of them. The hours they spent at my house were therefore hours of anxiety as well as activity." Douglass sent a friend to inquire when the next steamer on the Genesee River was stopping in Canada, and found that there was one leaving that day for Toronto. He wrote, "There was danger that between my house and the landing, or the landing itself, we might meet trouble. Indeed, the landing was a place where the trouble was likely to occur, if at all. As patiently as I could, I waited for the shades of night to come on, and then put the men in my Democrat carriage and started for the landing on the Genesee. It was an exciting ride and somewhat speedy. We reached the boat at least 15 minutes before the time of its departure, and without remark or molestation. But those 15 minutes seemed much longer than usual." Douglass stayed on the boat until the last possible moment, and then Parker gave him a pistol taken from Ed Gorsuch as a thank you.
Oh.
Yeah. So
a memento.
A memento. Well, and that's exactly what Douglass called it. So Douglass referred to it as a memento for the Battle of Liberty, and he greatly appreciated it. He wrote, "It inflicted fatal wounds on the fugitive slave bill. It became thereafter almost a dead letter, for the slaveholders found that not only did it fail to put them in possession of their slaves, but that the attempt to enforce it brought odium upon themselves and weakened the slave system." Yeah, so Douglass would cherish that gun for like the rest of his life. It was like one of his like most prized possessions.
That's cool.
Yeah. In A Freeman's Tale, Parker wrote, "After walking for a little, a friend pointed out the officers on the hunt for us, just as the boat pushed off from the wharf. Some of our friends from the shore called me out by name. Our pursuers looked very much like fools, as they were. I told one of the gentlemen on the shore to write Klein that I was in Canada. Once on the boat and fairly out to sea towards the land of my liberty, my mind became calm, my spirits very much depressed at the thoughts of my wife and children. Before I had little time to think much about them." Which, I mean, he's busy. Fair. It's been a hectic couple of days for him. But yeah, I like that he was like talking some trash on the slave catchers, like once the boat was in the river. Yeah. Like, see you later, bitches. So in the next edition of Frederick Douglass's weekly abolitionist newspaper, the front page story was titled "Freedom's Battle at Christiana," and contained specific details about the event that Douglass could have only gotten from Parker himself. But the article made no mention of the fugitives' recent stopover in Rochester. Both Parker and Douglass would stay quiet about this part of the escape for years to come. And like I said, even when Parker wrote about it in 1866, he would still protect Douglass's identity, referring to him only as a friend of mine who aided them. So Parker, Pinckney, and Johnson landed in Canada with no money and no real plan. Like they just had to flee.
They were like, okay, they can't get us here. We got to get here. That's it.
So we got to figure,
we'll figure out the rest.
This is only like 3 days later after the riot. They didn't have a ton of time to figure stuff out. So now they're in Canada and they need to figure out what to do. Parker saw a man he knew from Maryland just by chance wandering around.
That's weird.
Yeah. And
I guess everybody in Canada is just huddled along the border.
Yeah. Yeah. So he ran into a guy that he knew from Maryland, and the man pretended not to know him. And Parker called him out on it. He was like, "What the hell, dude? Like, you know me." And the man felt guilty. And so he like looped back around and came back and admitted that he did know them and bought him a meal. So at least they got some food. Economic conditions for Black people in Canada were actually worse than in Lancaster County at the time, but at least they were free. There was an ongoing attempt to locate and extradite the men back to face murder charges. Parker wrote, "On Monday evening, the 23rd, we started for Toronto, where we arrived safely the next day. Directly after landing, we heard that Governor Johnston of Pennsylvania had made a demand of the Governor of Canada for me under the extradition treaty. I intended to see what they would do with me. Going at once to the government house, I entered the first office I came to and told him that I had heard Governor Johnston of Pennsylvania. I had requested his government send me back. Yes, they want you back. Will you go? I will not be taken back alive, said I. I ran from my master to be free. I have run from the United States to be free. I am now going to stop running. Are you a fugitive from labor? He asked. I told him I was. Why? He answered. They say you are a fugitive from justice. How does it happen? He then asked. That you lived in Pennsylvania so long and no person knew you were a fugitive from labor. I do not get other people to keep my secrets, sir, I replied. My brother and family only knew that I had been a slave. He then assured me that I would not, in his opinion, have to go back. But you are as free a man as I am, he said. That's also, Parker's just super bold. Like to just walk into the government office like your first day of freedom.
And he's the governor of Canada?
This is just a random government office.
Okay.
He walked into the first government office he saw and was like, "Hey, I'm William Parker. I hear that the governor of Pennsylvania wants me to be sent back. What are you going to do about it?"
It's like, I'm not going.
Yeah. And the guy's like, "Oh, I guess you're not going to go then. You're free." I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't go and just be like,
I would try to keep a low profile.
Yeah, he did not. He's like, "No, I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to run. I'm here. What are you going to do about it?" And Canada was not in favor of the slavery, so they said that he was not going to have to get sent back. Took the men 3 more weeks to find work, and then they started settling in. Parker was hearing rumors of his wife's capture. Eliza had planned to travel north at night and hide in haystacks during the day. Along her way, she was twice taken into custody. And then somehow freed.
It still seems fucked up to me. Like he's riding trains and shit and making buddies and getting people are buying him drinks.
Yeah.
She's got she and his wife and kids have to like slink through the bushes all day and then sleep in haystacks.
Yeah. So we'll get a little more detail into how she gets like freed. Well, her kids, it's not the kids. So we'll cover the kids.
She stashed them somewhere.
She left the kids with her mom. She's like running at night, hiding in haystacks during the day. She's captured once and then like escapes somehow.
She probably strangled someone.
Yeah, she's captured again. And then there's this weird thing that happens. We'll talk about it a little more in the trial episode. But there's this weird thing that happens where they like let her go because she's a woman.
Oh, okay.
So she just gets let go. But, she eventually does make her way up to Canada. Her old master from Maryland, having heard of all of this, had come looking for her. So she has like an extra group of people hunting her in addition to the people who are hunting all the rioters, in general. And because of this, because she had this like extra pressure, she decided to leave her 3 children with her mother. We don't know that's basically all we know. It was that is what Parker wrote about for Eliza's mistake or escape. We don't get to hear a whole lot about like her version of her escape. So that's just kind of all we knew. The hardships of life as a fugitive slave and all the bloodshed from the recent riot was too much for Eliza's mother, Cassie. She grew depressed and started trying to convince her children that were still in the Lancaster area, Eliza's brothers, to try to just return to slavery. She's like, "This sucks." She's like, it's poor here and people are, we're poor and people are getting killed. Like, what if we all just go back to being slaves? And, they of course said no. They did not want to go back to being slaves. There are some sources that say that police further harassed Cassie with graphic depictions of the deaths of her and her family, what they would face if they didn't turn themselves in. Mm-hmm. So, maybe she was trying to convince her family to return to slavery because the cops were scaring her.
Right.
she probably would have given them any information if she had any to give, but they kind of kept Cassie in the dark. So she was just being tormented, basically.
This is Eliza's mom.
This is Eliza's mom, Cassie, because Eliza, her mom, and her brothers were all living in southern Lancaster at the time. One account has Cassie arrested. Another said that she turned herself in. But both make it clear that after she had a hearing in Philadelphia about her fugitive slave status, they just kind of dumped her on the streets of Philadelphia with no way to get back to Lancaster County and her grandchildren.
Okay.
So either she, it doesn't matter if she was arrested or turned herself in. They were just like, all right, old lady, like into the streets with you. Then she, I guess, did turn herself in a second time. This is kind of weird. So the Philadelphia Bulletin gives a detailed account of Cassie turning herself in and asking to be returned to slavery.
Okay.
The court didn't know how to handle that request. That was like the only time that had ever happened. And so it's kind of like an interesting article in the Philadelphia Bulletin, because they're like, this is weird. This is somebody who wants to be a slave. This has never happened before. It's a weird read because it kind of comes across as like, oh, isn't this like an amusing story about a simple black woman and like meant to like entertain their racist readers.
Yeah.
But members of the Philadelphia Abolition Society were present. They would sit in on these hearings to make sure that things were as legitimate as they could be. At least
going according to like the racist letter of the law.
Yeah. So members of the Philadelphia Abolition Society did kind of confirm that Cassie was asking to be returned to slavery. So at least that happened. So, her whole story is kind of weird, like where she is definitely unhappy in the current situation, and either out of fear or out of exhaustion or just because she never knew another life, she wants to go back to slavery. And she thinks like, okay, if we can just all go back to Maryland, I can bring my grandkids with me, and everything will just settle down and be quiet. They did not let her, they did return her to slavery. They did not let her bring her grandchildren with them.
But what happened to her grandchildren?
They made it to Canada somehow.
Okay.
Like friends, like remember this is a whole network of like abolitionists. So their friends and, this like proto underground railroad kind of helped the kids get to Canada. And so eventually William, Eliza and the kids are all reunited in Canada. That's good. They all do get back together.
Kids don't just get dumped in Canada with no plan. But that's good.
As far as the federal court system goes, like they didn't give a shit what happened to those kids. They took Cassie, returned her to slavery, and just like left the kids in Christiana on their own. So the story is that that Cassie's children, Eliza and her brothers, had escaped and Cassie was still a slave, and that their master was convinced that Cassie was withholding information and had banished her from the farm and telling her that she could only return with the children.
Okay.
So it's possible that this whole thing with her trying to convince her kids to go back to slavery, turning herself in with to the federal court, like she was just an old woman who, was no longer useful for labor.
Right. They didn't have any need for her anymore.
Her slaver had like used her up and then banished her as a punishment and just kind of threw her into this like scary underground world of, escaped slaves and riots.
Yeah.
And it was just, it's a sad story. Cassie just had a sad story overall. The court did send her back. Their previous master, Davis, did accept her back and found a place for her as a nurse to members of the extended family. And she, I guess kind of lived quietly in Maryland as a slave, but she never saw her kids again. She never saw her grandkids again. Just like a whole weird little sad side story there. Just like, I never really thought about banishment from slavery as a punishment before, but it kind of makes sense. Like she's been institutionalized to a degree. She spent her whole life in that system, and then they cast her out as a form of punishment with like no support.
And when she's old and she's got like, she's got no fire left.
Yeah. So Yeah, so Cassie, but like I said, and then the kids made it to Canada one way or the other, and the families reunited. An abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, interviewed Cassie and she said that she asked to be returned to slavery to avoid violence from the slave catchers. So, like I said, it's possible that this whole thing was just coercion and fear of violence. She requested to see her grandkids before returning to Maryland. That request was denied, and she never saw anyone again. Abraham Hall, another of the rioters, gave a similar story. He was arrested a few days after the riot and said that he wanted to return to slavery, but that his neighbors in Christiana had stopped him. He's like, no, I always wanted to go back, and they stopped me. With him, we have more evidence that, the police threatened him and beat him, and, he requested to be returned to slavery and pretended that he always wanted to be returned to slavery.
Because he wanted to be a slave instead of getting constantly beaten by the police.
Right. So it's possible that like a similar thing was happening with Cassie. It's all to say that they just weren't treating the people captured in connection with the riot with any kind of civility. So all in all, Hall was one of nearly 150 people arrested in connection with the riot. And out of that 150 arrested, 39 would be charged with treason. And that trial is where we will pick back up next time.
It's a crazy charge for
for
a lot of people. I guess in most of those cases, like really just happening to be in the area when someone was defending themselves.
Yeah. 39 people charged with treason as a result of not wanting to see people sent into slavery.
Yeah, treason's like, I don't know, it's like a really serious charge.
Yeah.
They don't charge people with treason for very many things.
No. And so like the principals in this are gone. Parker and Pickney and Johnson, who are all living in the house.
And Gorsuch is dead.
Parker, Pickney, and Johnson are in Canada.
Right.
Gorsuch's escaped slaves disappeared from the record, presumably are in Canada. Cassie's immediate family, Eliza's immediate family, her brothers and her sister. Remember, Pickney was her brother-in-law. He's her sister's husband.
Right.
They make it up to Canada, and her mom, suffers this kind of tragic fate of like willingly returning to slavery because she's too old to do anything else. So a lot of the principals are all gone. They're up in Canada. And so the federal government is just kind of they're just gathering up whoever they can get. And
at this point, it's really just all people who were like peripherally involved.
Right. It's just, 75 to 100 people, 75 to 150 people showed up on the outskirts of the riot. They arrested 150 people. I doubt that all of them were even actually there. When people say a 75 to 150, you can assume it's somewhere in the middle. There probably wasn't 150 people there.
And they arrested 150
Yeah, so they arrested, any like black person in the area that might have something to do with the riot. And then 39 get charged with treason, including the white people. And that's going to be the trial. It's going to be Castor Hanway is going to be the first one to face trial.
All right.
And that's what we'll discuss next time.
Okay.
All right. So thank you for listening, everybody, and goodbye.